Hey guys, we are back with lesson 4 in our Intro to Genetics series. So what we observed in the last few lessons we really looked at was how to do Punnett squares and how to apply Mendel's principles with those Punnett squares. But as you'll find very quickly as you begin to study genetics, not all characteristics are inherited by what we might call a Mendelian pattern of inheritance. So I'm going to try to make this lesson really quick. This is part 1 of other patterns of inheritance. And so what we're going to do is we're going to focus specifically on incomplete dominance and codominance. So Gregor Mendel, we call him the father of modern genetics, and he observed what we now call Mendelian traits. In other words, there was a single gene that coded for one trait, and there was a pattern of what we would call simple dominance. There was a clear-cut, easy-to-tell characteristic, one allele that could hide the other. And so there was a dominant one and a recessive one. But not everything follows that pattern. For example, if you've ever paid any attention to flowers, carnations are a great example of this. When it comes to carnations, you can have red carnations, white carnations, and the funny thing is when you cross these, you end up with pink carnations. And so this is a non-Mendelian. It does not follow this pattern. All right, it does not work. There is no simple dominance when it comes to carnations with red and white crossing. You end up with a third phenotype, pink, but there's not new genetic information there. And so what is going on? Well, this is what we call a non-Mendelian trait. And very simply, that is a trait that does not follow the simple dominance pattern that Mendel observed. And there's several different types. We're going to focus our attention right now on incomplete dominance and codominance. So our example with carnations is an example of incomplete dominance. And so what we have here, if we wanted to look at the actual genotypes, our red genotype, we could represent with 2 capital R's. Now normally, right, with our Mendelian pattern, we said that capital letters represented dominant alleles. But in this case, it's incompletely dominant. It can't totally hide the white, meaning it can't completely override the lowercase r allele and just make it totally red. Now, on the kind of molecular level, what's really happening here is it just can't hide it, it can't overrule it completely, so it only inherits one red allele, and it can only produce enough pigment to appear pink. The R, the one that we call white, it's actually coding for no pigment really, so the flower appears white. So this is not a case of the two technically really blending. It's not as if there's red and white pigments making pink. It's just that the red pigment only gets coded for basically halfway, and you end up seeing what appears to be pink. But this is an example of incomplete dominance. So I'd like to do a quick example with this. Let's cross 2 pink flowers. So this is a non-Mendelian cross here. It's incomplete dominance. So we're going to take both heterozygous and we're going to do a quick Punnett square and look at the results. They're quite interesting for this one. And what we'll find is that we can get, by crossing 2 pink flowered carnation plants, we can actually get any of the colors back out of it. And we'll find that one of the 4 ends up being white. So this is kind of a very interesting pattern of inheritance, incomplete dominance. And there are lots of other examples of this, but the flower color is typically the main one that most people go for when they're teaching this subject matter. And so we're going to move right along to our next example of a non-Mendelian trait, and that is codominance. Now this is different than incomplete dominance. Very different. So what we have in codominance is exactly what the word sounds like. We have traits Prefix co, meaning together. Together they are dominant. They are both dominant. So what we actually have here is an example from cows, and if you raise any livestock, if you've ever seen any livestock, you've probably seen cows that look like this right here. We see a similar pattern of inheritance in horses and the way that their coat color can be, and it's a bit more complicated. This isn't the only thing that affects it, but this is a great example of codominance. And so with codominance, again, both are dominant. So the way that we represent this in my class most often is with two different capital letters. And the reason that we would do this is because it very clearly distinguishes it from incomplete dominance. I'm going to go back for just a moment. With incomplete dominance, you'll notice we still used R's, and we had our heterozygous had a capital and a lowercase. But with codominance, I like to use two different letters because what it does, it allows us to very clearly see that we are dealing with a codominant trait and not an incompletely dominant trait. So when we do this cross, here's what we end up with. All of these cows in this particular cross will have what is known as a roan coat, where they actually get red hairs and they get the white hairs. So both traits are very clearly expressed. They are codominant. There's no incomplete anything. It's codominant. They're both there. Another example of this is human blood type. When it comes to type A and type B, the antigens, the A and B alleles are both codominant. So if you inherit the A allele and the B allele, you'll have both antigens and you'll have type AB blood. We'll get into that in a different video. But for now, let's do one more very quick example, and we will wrap this video up. So let's cross two roan cows and see what we get. In fact, I invite you to pause the video for just a moment and try to complete this square on your own. Okay, so I hope you've had a chance to pause the video and complete this. And as we finish it, we'll find that what we get, we can have red, we can have roan cows from this cross, and we can have white cows from this cross. So all three phenotypes are possible in this case. So the red would be 25%, the roan would be 50%, that's the heterozygous RW, and then the white is the homozygous WW. So it is the last 25%. So I hope this video was helpful to you in understanding a couple non-Mendelian patterns of inheritance, incomplete dominance and codominance. As always, I want to invite you to check out the other videos on the channel. You can check out other videos in this playlist, this series, Intro to Genetics. And as always, please subscribe and watch out for part 2 of other patterns of inheritance.